So after I saw Hidden Figures, I saw Arsenal. And honestly, I didn't know anything about the plot going into it. Didn't know what it was about. Just wanted to see it because of two things. One, the really low score on Rotten Tomatoes, and then the fact that it has both Nick Cage and John Cusack. And so I was like, okay, I've seen them in a bunch of bad movies lately. Let's see another one. It's better than the bad Nick Cage movies and the bad John Cusack movie I've seen recently. Okay, so even though Nick Cage and John Cusack are probably the highest paid actors in this movie and the most well known, they are not the main characters, by the way. Instead, this is the story of two brothers. One of them is JD, played by Adrian Grenier. He's in Entourage, I believe. I never saw the series. I saw the movie Entourage, so he's in that. And then the older brother, Mikey, played by, Jonathan, I'm not going to pronounce that last name. The older brother, Mikey, well, he's gone down a dark and criminal path. While the younger brother, JD, is on the good, legit, legal path. Mikey is always getting in trouble, and now he's gotten in more trouble when he is kidnapped and held for ransom. And now JD either has to pay the money or find his brother before things get worse. Well, that's the overall premise of the movie, but it takes a long time to actually get there. And the way that the movie is executed, well, it's simple yet not that exciting. You can still take a simple premise and have it be exciting. This movie doesn't do that, for me, at least. So for the most part, this is kind of a bland action movie that is gritty and bloody, while at the same time having some really unintentional humor within it. It's one of the worst movies I've seen out of the 10 movies I've seen this year, but I have a feeling by the end of the year it's not going to stay in the worst 20 or the worst 25. Because I did have a few things I legitimately liked from it. For one, the action is handled pretty well overall. It's nothing groundbreaking, nothing new, but nothing terrible either, and it's fairly effective. Some of the action is generic, some of it is chopped up and edited in a way where a bunch of different angles happen, and you don't really see the punch sometimes, because it kind of cuts away to it from a different angle, which is kind of weird given that this is a rated R, gritty, bloody movie. Towards the end action sequences, it gets better and feels more bloody and R-rated like it's supposed to, but the first couple action sequences almost feel like a PG-13 movie, despite there still being blood in it, and a lot of cursing. And overall, I do like the theme or the message or whatever you want to call it in this movie about the two brothers, one on a good path, one on a criminal path, them still being brothers, still bonding, and still having a connection to the point where they will do anything for each other. And a possible path of redemption for the criminal brother, while the younger brother is trying to help his older brother as much as he can. It's a really great premise and a really great addition to the story, but at the same time I feel that there are better action movies out there with the same premise that are done in a more complete way, feels like a more fully developed way, while still being more exciting than Arsenal. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'm sure they're out there. And some of the scenes when it's just the family together rather than any action sequence and it's just the family bonding or talking, or some of it felt genuine and some of it actually was good, to the point where some of them are my favorite scenes in the movie, to be quite honest. More so than the action sequences. And sometimes there is actual subtle moments in this film. Sometimes those subtle moments are ruined when they're blatantly explained after in a later scene, or sometimes it feels like those subtle moments may have come by accident. Sometimes it expects you to realize from what's happening on screen the relationships of characters, what their jobs are, what they do. Like, for instance, John Cusack's character. took me the second viewing to realize he's an undercover cop, because it never really explains that he's an undercover cop. I mean, the characters never actually say it. You're just expected to know it from some of the different clues here and there, and sometimes those clues are a little abstract or maybe not as forward as they should be. That's not to say that I can't put two and two together if I really pay attention to a movie, but this didn't feel like one of those movies where you should pay attention to, especially when a lot of other things are so blatant. It almost feels like what was that movie? Jupiter Ascending, where they have some subtle moments where the audience has to figure things out themselves, while almost 80% of it is more explaining to the audience exactly what it is. Arsenal felt that way too, except it's not trying to explain a crazy sci-fi world. It's just a normal crime thriller, almost generic action film. And I think most of the acting was okay. There was nothing really great, nothing really grand, but nothing particularly bad except for one actor, and that is Nick Cage. But I'll talk about Nick Cage when it comes to the bad. I think everyone else did a fine job, and even John Cusack was one of my favorite characters in the movie, mainly because he kind of felt like he didn't give a shit. Like, even during the action scenes, it almost felt like, hey, can I be cut out of this action sequence? I don't want to chase this guy. So you have your other main character chase him. I'm just going to sit out. And during this, there's this one chase scene where it's almost like, yeah, I'm not going to run today.
Can I help you? I need to talk to you again. I already talked to you.
I think some of the practical effects with the blood was actually really good. There's a really great head explosion in this movie, which was epic, and it was towards the end of the film. But then there are times when the blood is completely over the top and almost comical. Like there's this one part where Nick Cage is beating a guy with his bare fists, and there's so much blood that it just splatters everywhere. And you're just like, okay, really? That much blood? And the funny thing is, there's a scene later on, or maybe even before that, where a guy is getting beat by brass knuckles, and there's less blood when it comes to the brass knuckle beating than the bare fist beating that Nick Cage brings upon this guy. And it doesn't help that that sequence is in slow motion as well. There's a lot of slow motion in this film. Sometimes it works, but most of the time it just felt really bad slow-mo. Almost like it's a freeze frame rather than an actual slow-mo because they're moving so slow, while a really bad CGI bullet whizzes past is really bad looking sometimes. Honestly, or maybe not bad looking, but cartoony looking. And I don't think that's the effect that they wanted to go with. It almost felt like they had just seen 300, because there's a lot of action sequences where it goes slow-mo and then speeds to normal speed and then slow-mo and then speed to normal speed. Sometimes there's very needless slow motion in the film. Almost like, okay, why did you need slow-mo for that? 300 isn't the only movie that it felt like these filmmakers recently saw, or editors, or whoever implemented the slow motion, because it almost seems like they saw Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice lately, because there's a scene where Adrian Grenier goes into a bathtub with his wife. Kind of like Batman v Superman, where Superman goes in the bathtub with Lois Lane. Oh no, it's different because it's a different angle and water doesn't splash over the sides of the tub. Now, I told you about some of the mixed things I have and some of the bad negatives I have with some of the positives as well, but here's the downright bad for me. where it's not mixture, it's not a little good and a little bad. This is all bad, pretty much. Sometimes, okay, the movie is very straightforward. It's in chronological order, except for the little snippet at the beginning of the film. Everything happens in order, but the strangest thing about it is, even though it goes in order chronologically, somehow that chronological order is a little bit more confusing than if it went out of order. For instance, there's a few scenes when they're kids before they're adults, because at the beginning of the film there's a little introduction with Adrian Grenier going,
"Someone once asked me why I stick up for Mikey. They clearly don't have a brother."
It goes back 23 years earlier when they're kids, and it has a few scenes there, then it jumps 23 years back, and then the whole situation happens with the kidnapping and all that. But those scenes when they're kids, for some reason, it confused me the first time I watched it, even though it's in chronological order, because there's some weird choices to it that almost felt like it wasn't in order, even though it was in order. First is a scene where they go into the arcade and have some fun or whatnot. Well, the little brother doesn't. JD doesn't get any fun because he doesn't get any quarters.
Don't cry, little bitch.
But his older brother then eventually makes up for it by giving him the prize that they won after he was kind of a douche to his brother. Anyway, they go home to where they live. I think they live with their uncle. I think it's explained later that that was their uncle, and he takes care of his little brother. Then it's sort of the next day when they go back to the house, and then they suddenly find out his uncle and aunt are completely dead. Blood everywhere. He blew his brains out with a shotgun, and to protect his younger brother from seeing it, he's like, "Here, go to the arcade, here's all the quarters, just get the fuck out of here."
You're still standing there like a fucking retard. Go to the arcade.
So then, as he's like shocked about his uncle and aunt dead, which I thought was his parents at first, because it never says it until like 23 years later, almost towards the end of the movie, that, oh yeah, they were the uncle and aunt. So little JD is playing the arcade, having fun in slow-mo. And so you think the older brother, oh, he's going to call the cops or something. No, instead he goes to the arcade, and I'm like, okay, why is he going to the arcade? Goes into the back of the arcade, which leads to what looks like a strip club. Goes into the back of that, where it's like hallways made of these almost curtains, like white clear curtains. And he's going down the hallway. Then you find out behind him, the younger brother is watching him and following him, which it gave no indication that he was, because he was still playing on the arcade in super slow-mo. But that doesn't matter because it's never mentioned again, and he must have just ran off back into the strip club and then back into the arcade. Because older brother Mikey witnesses a horrible murder happen when Nick Cage does a brutal murder that actually was the only time that Nick Cage in this movie actually felt intimidating and actually did a fine job. Everything else Nick Cage was bad in this movie. The guy that was in the chair that he was killing kind of looked like the uncle that committed suicide, and so I wondered, oh, is this a setup? Did he actually kill the uncle, and this is actually before they discovered the uncle dead? But then why would it feel like he brought... Well, it is in chronological order, because apparently it's two different actors, but they looked a little bit alike to me, especially with quick glances. So that confused me. And then after that scene, you think, okay, well now the cops are going to show up. Now they're going to have at least a little bit of sequence, and then explain where they're going to go to now, because at first I thought it was their parents and not their uncle and aunt. And then it's like, no, let's just go to a baseball game where younger JD is playing baseball and Mikey's watching him. And then later on, Mikey's like, oh, you can do this lawn because I'm working with Eddie now. Which at first I had no idea who Eddie was until I looked it up on IMDb and found out it was Nick Cage. So yeah, that throws in a bunch of information to you, And almost like it's expecting you to realize everything, and then it kind of just makes it a little bit confusing in the process, because it's almost later explained towards the middle or the end of the movie. Well, by then you're already confused. But then again, maybe it was my brain overthinking a lot of this stuff, because some of it was a little complicated because of my own thoughts as I was thinking things were happening when they weren't happening that way at all. But anyway, let's get to Nick Cage, because his performance, his makeup, everything about him, definitely over the top. And it's back to fun, over-the-top, crazy Nick Cage that we expect in bad movies. He was boring in Pay the Ghost, and he was boring in Left Behind. He's interesting in this. Unfortunately, the movie around him is way better than Pay the Ghost and way better than Left Behind. And so now it feels like just bad acting and overacting from Nicolas Cage, and makes it feel like the downer of this movie. It's like the negative of this movie. Because when everything is serious, when everything is an R-rated, gritty movie, except for the middle part, which feels like it's a PG-13 action film, it's supposed to be serious, it's supposed to be R-rated and gritty, and you got this over-the-top, crazy Nick Cage performance, it becomes laughable, and that's not what you want for an R-rated, gritty film. Like, he plays convincingly deranged and crazy maniac in this film. Unfortunately, a convincing maniac deranged person from Nick Cage is also a funny thing, because we've seen so many crazy Nick Cage, or at least it's been embedded into pop culture now, that Nick Cage crazy is just hysterically bad. Now when you get crazy Nick Cage, you laugh rather than actually feel like he's a deranged psychopath, and you're not really scared of him. There are at least 2, maybe 3 moments where Nick Cage is just amazingly funny in this film. But that's not a good thing for an R-rated gritty film, because that's kind of a negative. Entertaining, but negative. Hopefully I'll show you some clips here of some of the crazy overacting that I'm talking about.
But you remember when we were partners? Had a little carjacking operation when we were teens. Cops were on us one day, we ran. You got away, but I got caught. I was 17! They offered me community service. All I had to do was give up my accomplice, you, my brother. But now, I took the years. I got out in 3. I promised my share would be waiting. The day I got out, there was nobody there to pick me up. I took a goddamn bus for the prison. You had taken my share, gone to Florida, and set up the business in New Orleans with my money! You fucker!
You hear about that little boy in Jackson? Yeah, his genius parents poured Drano an old soda pop bottle, and the boy found it, drank it. Guess what happened to him? Burned his esophagus. Started gagging. Puked up black blood and bits of his stomach.
Yeah, those might be interesting scenes and funny scenes and crazy over-the-top Nick Cage performances. Unfortunately for the rest of the film, it's mostly him mumbling, whining, or talking with his mouth closed, like talking through his teeth. And so it just feels bad rather than unintentionally funny. And you've probably seen the clips by now. His nose and his hair is just... it's like some of the worst makeup I've seen in a while. Like, it was completely distracting. Now, it does turn out that this character is kind of a reprising role for him, because it's his character from Deadfall, I believe. I never saw Deadfall. I've seen clips of Nick Cage being crazy, so I don't know if he dies in Deadfall and this is a character just paying homage to Deadfall by having another character named Eddie played by Nick Cage looking the same way as he did in Deadfall. But it's definitely no coincidence, because even the director of Deadfall plays an actor in this film and plays Nick Cage's brother in this film. Unfortunately, this is not the right film for Nick Cage to be in and be the deranged, funny psychopath. Even though the action is okay and mediocre and better at the end despite its unintentionally funny moments within it, for the most part, I didn't really feel much for the action at all. And it's not just because it feels generic and has been done before in better movies. It's just, I never felt any stakes in the film. Because even though the brother gets kidnapped in the film, from the way the film started and from the way that the film gave you the idea of what might happen and how he was kidnapped, I started thinking, you know what? I think the older brother's in on this, and there's really no stakes at all. Like, I never felt that the older brother was in danger for at least half of the film, because I thought he was in on the kidnapping, especially the way that it leads up to it. And as JD is trying to figure out what happened to his brother, it was even given clues from other people thinking, hey, maybe Mikey's in on this. And I started thinking, yeah, I feel like that's going to be the twist, that he's in on it, and I've already figured that out. And not to mention, our main hero is following dead-end leads, especially when we as the audience know that they are going to lead in dead ends because we already know who kidnapped Mikey. And the middle part of the film just felt pointless to me. What I do like about the film, though, is we find out that, oh, actually the older brother wasn't in on this. He had a bit of redemption, and he's like, no, I'm not going to go with this kidnapping, and he gets kidnapped anyway. So I do have to give the film a hand there, but unfortunately, because I felt like I already figured out the twist, I was kind of bored through the middle of the film. Even though I do like the climax at the end, especially some of the unintentional funny moments with the slow-mo, the scene right after the climax, I pretty much hate and feel like it's a letdown of an ending for sure. And all the baseball references and the bonding with baseball felt a little pointless to me as well. I think there are people that are going to find Arsenal good, and it might have a bit of a cult following, especially with the Nick Cage performance. I think there are some people that don't see a lot of action movies and see this might find it to be a very thrilling movie, especially if they don't think that Mikey might be in on it. But I think for most people that see a lot of action is just going to find this to be a very generic and bland film. So for me, I'm going to give Arsenal 1.5, and that's mainly because even though I feel it's a bad movie, it does have a lot of potential, and I almost was going to give it a 2-star. So, have you seen Arsenal? What do you think about it? Go ahead and comment below. If not, what is your favorite crazy Nick Cage performance? And I'm talking about when he plays a crazy psychopath, and what is your favorite performance by him in those terms? I have to go with Vampire's Kiss. For me, nothing beats Vampire's Kiss. But then again, I have seen clips of Deadfall, and that's really hilarious. So if you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and check out my movie reviews. I've got movie reviews of 2015, 16, and hopefully more from 2017. As always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.